Yeah. We like to determine where we think we could go in our future based on how we've done in the past. Now, obviously, there's an element of preparation and making sure of some things. I'm pretty loud here, but I do like it because I don't want to throw out my voice today. It's a little raspy. So you do have to prepare, because what you prepare for today is where you kind of end up tomorrow. However, you don't have to do it all based on the mistakes of the past and say, I'm not enough, because God looks to the future that He planned and designed for you and sees you walking in it. What a great time. Well, again, I'm so glad you're here wherever you're joining us from, whether it's online. I'm on Facebook right now. I'm feeling like I actually closed it by accident, feeling like I should start trying to chat on YouTube, see if anybody's on YouTube there. But sometimes you can interact, and I'll try to say hi to you. I forget, but we love our people that are joining us online. Like Jen Link said, she was an online person for a while. So I'm so proud of Jen Link. Come on, like she got up here, and there's some of you that are like, give me a chance up here, and then there's others that are like, please don't ask me. She's a please don't ask me person, but I asked her anyways, and she graciously said yes. And so, man, if you don't know her, you should get to know her. She's speaking from living life on generosity. She has served and given her life for the kids across the street for many years, making way less than what a teacher should make, and just not even complained about it once. And so if you want to give a shout out or promotion for Westdale Christian School across the street, K-9. Have amazing teachers there. She's one of the teachers. If you've been looking to put your kids in a Christian education where Jesus is talked about, prayer is included, things like that, hey, you can talk to her or go to the welcome booth. We are taking registrations for the fall. That wasn't planned, but there you go. Maybe someone saying, hey, I'd like that for my kids. Hallelujah. How's everyone doing today? That sounded like John. Was that John? No? Okay. Well, that was Scott. Where is John here today? John Thody? I've seen him a few times coming. He was here. Okay. Was that Scott? I did not know what happened to your voice in that. It was like stuff was caught up in it, and it released some tribal cry. Right? Like that was, something was coming out. He was releasing some inner, struggles. But he's happy to be here. Hallelujah. Hi, Ralph. I know you don't want me to say anything, but I saw you come in and it blessed my heart, and I thought it's going to be a good service. I wish I knew all your names. I'd say hi to you. I'm just enjoying the presence of God. That's what I'm doing. Oh, that's what I asked. I asked how many of you are glad we're having some extended praise and worship. Come on, isn't that good? If you're new and you're wondering, we're just giving space for God to move. We're going slow. That's my series right now. We're talking about pacing yourself, what to do when life gets frantic, life gets hectic, life seems a lot. It's time to go slow, which you found out the last 2 weeks, and we're going to talk about a lot today. What does slow stand for? Who remembers who was here? What is S? Sit. L. O. Obey. W. Worship. Slow. First week we talked about, 2 weeks ago, talk about slow your roll. R-O-L-E, the things you take on. Last week we talked about slow your fool, and the idea of that is when life gets frantic, when life gets hectic, when your pace gets really fast, guess what tends to come out of you? The fool. You say things maybe you shouldn't, you react in a way you shouldn't. There's a lot of foolish things that come out, and so if you can slow your fool, right? There's a lot of things I do when I don't have space and I feel a little stressed that come out, and I'm like, man, that wasn't the smartest thing. I reacted the wrong way. I did this. And so, slow your fool. And this week we're going to talk about something else to do with schedules. And so, how many of you know, how many of you have ever been to a place in your life, or maybe right now you're saying, man, I wish I had more time? Anyone ever wish they had more time? I think Matt was saying that to me this morning, basically, right? I wish I had more time, or I wish I would have done this with my time. If I had more time, I would do this, right? You hear about people when they get to the end of their life on this earth, in this earth suit, that they rarely say, I wish I spent more time, making more money, or I wish I spent more time buying more toys, or getting bigger boat, or having it's usually, I wish I would have worked on my relationship with my kids better. I wish I would have spent more time with people that mattered to me, right? And so time is a fixed commodity. Some of you may not know this, but we all have a fixed amount of time, and it's fixed in that there's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, right? And no matter how hard you try, you're not going to get 25 hours in a day unless something supernatural happens, right? Like Joshua extending the sun, if you know some scriptures. Or science continues to progress and invents time travel. Or you're a fan of the Avengers and you have Infinity Stones. Then you can mess around with time. But other than that, it's a fixed commodity. And not to sound morbid or anything, but you've been here for an hour today. You are 1 hour closer to death than you were before you came here. That's it. Have a good Sunday. No. Right? I mean, we don't like thinking about, but that's it. There's a set time. Right? The author of Hebrews says there's a set time to everyone has an appointed time to die. Now, understand, if you're a Jesus follower, as we've been talking about, your death is to this natural house, but we go on to be with the Lord forever. Right? So it's not as morbid as it may sound. And if you don't have that hope, it probably is pretty morbid because you say, I don't know what's happening. But we believe in an afterlife. All right. But time is fixed. Now, you can do things to fulfill your time better, and you can do things to waste your time, right? But it's fixed. It's a diminishing commodity. Like I said, we have an hour less. And so there's a lot of things that fill your time, and you get a choice every day what's going to fill up your time or your schedule. How many of you actually have a schedule where you schedule things? A few of you. I have it's getting more and more precise schedule as things get busier, right? But you have a certain choice on what you're going to allow into your schedule. And as things get busy, as the pace increases, before you know it, you got a lot of things coming into your schedule, filling up your time, filling up your free space. And if we're not careful, you look back on your last weeks, your last months, and go, man, I wish I would have had more time for. I wish I would have set apart time for this, or I wanted to start this hobby, or I wanted to get to cleaning this part of the house, or I wanted to start this project in the house, and eventually you go, it's 6 months down the road, it's a year down the road, and you go, man, if only I had more time, because everything's filling up your schedule. And so this is a thing we all have to contend with, and today I'm going to teach you something I hope that you learn from. You've probably heard before, but maybe you'll see it in a new way, of something that you all must get in your life, that I must have in my life in order to do things that we want to do so we don't get to the end of our life and go, man, I wish I would have. I wish I could have done that better. And so even with the first part one, which was slow your roll, this is important to learn how to slow your roll. And slow your fool, this needs to be a part of your life in order to slow your fool. And part 3 today, as we end this is going to be important to slow your schedule. This is the thing, you need to slow your schedule. So we're going to jump into this today, and I'm going to try to show you some things about this, all surrounded this idea that we're going to talk about. So first of all, do you have that slide with all the words there, Alana? I think I put it up. Oh, that's really small. Well, that showed more than I even thought was going to show. Well, we got it all on there. Okay, but the idea was that. So see, right now what you see is a whole bunch of words. It's really small. I thought it was going to fill up the screen more, but it actually showed more than I thought. But imagine if I did my notes and then was like, here's my points, and I just threw them all up there in small print, as many words as I could do. It would be really hard for you first to see, but it's going to be really hard for you to understand and follow along and do it. If you notice, the points I put up there are 5 or 6 words, 12 words. I have some big, I have some underlined, I have certain colors. And so there's a reason for that. When you read, I don't know if you know this, but there's a strategy. You know how people do stuff in books. Here's the Dakes Annotated Reference Bible that Pastor Jim blessed me with when I transitioned to lead pastor here, and it's one of his study Bibles. But if you can see, I don't know if you can see this. I don't know if you can zoom in, Tanika. I caught you, right? I don't know if you can get in here. But if you look at this Bible, there's a lot of words on this page. Right? Are we in? Hi, everyone watching online. Okay, and now you can zoom out. There we go. There is a lot of words on this page. Some of you might have to zoom in your glasses or something like this. I know it's pretty far. But there is going this is filled to the edges. And so there's a lot that are going on. And when you try to read this or look at this, it can be a bit overwhelming. Anyone? When you look at that slide, that can stay up there until I go to my next point, Alana. That's a lot of words. That can be overwhelming. And so they have this thing here. They got a lot of words here. Here's another book that I got. This is Mike Todd's Crazy Faith. I don't know if you heard of Mike Todd. He's a great communicator, great preacher. But this is a book that I was given. If you look at this one, you want to zoom in, Tanika? All right, so in this one here, okay, we're good. In this one here, if you see, there's not quite as many words on each page. They have a little bit of things. They got things in boxes. They got some things bolded, or he has some things bolded on here. There's a few pages. They got like the title, capturing some of this, right? And so you start to see that it becomes a little bit easier to read. And now I have a book here called Chicken Soup for the Mother's Soul, for the Mother and Me. I don't think this is my book. Hopefully it's my wife's. But I found it here. But if you've ever read chicken soup stuff, they got pictures. They got little bit of words, and then you got like headings, and it's short little things with little cartoons and things like that. There is not as many words. There's pictures. There's other things. There's a lot of space around the words. And you notice today, more than back in the day when this was done, books are written with a lot of space around the word. Points are not done like this with just everything thrown up there. Because people realize who are writing books, I've realized, we all realize that without space in your pace, without space in the things that you do, it can become very stressful. It can become overwhelming. Without space in your thoughts. Anyone ever had no space where things just keep filling it and the thoughts keep coming and then the stress starts building? Or space in your finances maybe, space in your reading. If you don't have space, then guess what? It can be hard to comprehend and understand. And so book reading, finances, even relationships without space can become overwhelming, become a burden if they don't have this space or this stuff around the pages, which we call margin. Margin. The dictionary definition, one of the dictionary definitions of margin is this: the space around the printed or written material on the page. So this is margin on this page, but every page in a book has margin around the outside. The Dakes is the closest I've seen to where there's no margin. They put that there because it's easier to read and comprehend. They have paragraphs, indents, spacing. All of you know you've gotten that email that's just a big thing with no indents and stuff, and it's a big, long email. I tend to send those to the team, but I try to break them up. Or that text message or something that's just, and you're like, oh, it's just so much. It's tough to read because there's no margin. Andy Stanley, who did this a few years ago on the idea of margin, said the definition is this: the amount available beyond what is necessary. So in this book, what is necessary is right to where the words go, but we got all this extra. This is beyond what is necessary to print this page. So you could just go right to here, but they've got some beyond what is necessary. Craig Rochelle of Life Church says the difference between what you have and what you need. What I need to do to print this is just right here. What I have is all this. What I need is probably this little bit. What I have here is all this extra. These pages have lots of margin. I said it this way: the space between your responsibilities and your ability to handle them. Between what you're responsible for and how much you can actually handle it, or I said this, respond to. It's the space between your responsibilities and your ability to respond to them. Because if we have no space, if we have no margin, guess what? We tend to react to things and not respond. Anyone ever reacted to something rather than respond? The difference being reaction is just kind of what comes out of you in that moment. Respond is like, okay, 2 deep breaths, and how am I going to address this? I'm going to step away and come back to that. Many emails I've almost sent out of reaction. I've saved myself a lot of foolery. And you step back, sit on it, and then you come back, and then I respond rather than react. I'm sure many of you have wanted to react to me at different times based on what I've preached or what I've said to you. Thanks, Hugh. So here's an example of this. Every Sunday, the music team gets here at 9 a.m. Well, they're supposed to get here at 9 a.m. Today was a struggle, right, music team? Come on. They're not even... What? No one was here at 9 a.m., but that's fine. Usually it's actually been really good lately. But we're supposed to be here at 9 a.m., okay? That is what is required. That is my responsibility. That is our responsibility. That is what is needed. I usually get here with my family. At best, I try to get here at 8:35, 8:40. That 20 minutes is space or margin. It's margin that I have from when I have to be here and what I'm allowed. It gives me some margin time. It gives me some breathing room. If you have $100 and you want to buy a pair of shoes and the pair of shoes cost you $80, that $20 is margin. It's beyond what you need. It's beyond what's necessary. $80 is necessary. Your responsibility to buy the shoes is $80, but your ability to handle buying the shoes has $100. So you got $20 of margin extra. Here's the definition I want you to write down, and then we can get all that off. Here's margin is the space between your load and your limits. The space between your load and your limits. If you look at a book, the load is where the written print is. The limits is where the page goes to. In the Dakes Annotated, there is not much space between the load of the words on the page and the limits around it. You don't got much room for extra. All right? In Mike Todd's book, there's a little bit more. Chicken soup for the mom. There's a lot of margin. And so there's two ways to get margin. We're going to focus on one, but there's two ultimate ways to get margin. You've either got to increase your limits or increase your capacity, get a bigger page. You can fit more on it. Which I hope as a maturing adult that you actually can handle more now than you did when you were 5. Can anyone handle more now than they did when they were 5? Can you handle more now than you did 5 years ago? Hopefully, that's called growth. So, we should be increasing our capacity and our limits for what we can handle. If I tried to take on this position when I was 23, I don't know what it would be like. Right? That would be, I don't know if my limit or my limits could handle the load. And even now, you kind of go, okay, you're learning this. So, you either got to increase your capacity, but usually what happens is when we increase our limits, guess what we do? We increase our load to match it. So as we get better at handling stuff, things just fill it in. Right? And so the second thing you have to be able to do to get margin is lessen your load. Remember, margin is the space between your load and your limit. And so we were talking last week about the pace and the week before about space and your pace. There's only so long you can operate at your limit. For instance, if you're in a 200-meter race, we talked about this. Guess what? You could probably run that at your limit and go for it. Maybe not now, some of you. You get 100 meters in and be like, I'm done. Maybe it's 20 meters for some of you at your limit. But you could probably run 200 meters at your limit. I remember years ago, the story isn't here, but I'm reminded of it. When I was teaching at another school, they had like a track day. And I was still pretty young, and so it was a track day with teachers and students, and it was a 1-kilometer run that they were doing for everybody. And I hadn't been training or anything, but I was still pretty, only a few years out of high school. So I remember thinking, I am just going to go for it. And I'm going to run this thing because I didn't want to lose, and I was still, I was trying to show off. I don't know what I was doing, but I'm like, I'm going to run this thing as fast as I can. I remember there was a guy training to be a police officer, and he had been running a lot. He was about 10 years older than me, and I thought, I can still beat him. And so that gun went off, and it was older students, and I just went for it, and I went at my limit, and it ended up, for whatever it was, 4 minutes and some seconds for the kilometer. And I remember, I think I won, or I got second, but I beat the guy I wanted to and beat a lot of people, and everyone's like, wow, that's amazing, you can still run fast. And then I remember I walked over, and this is the only time it happened. I walked over, and I felt so sick, and I just threw up everything I had, and I was like, that was not smart. I was at my limit for too long. The load I was carrying, what I was trying to run, was too much. And so there's a different pace for 200 meters and 20 kilometers. And if you try to operate life, like a 200-meter sprint, and you're always at your limit, at some point you're going to throw up. At some point you're going to burn out. At some point it's not going to work, and things are going to start not going well. And so what we need to realize is this: when we try to operate our load maxed up with our limit, without any space or margin, what ends up happening is as our margin decreases, as the words start to fill the page and everything that we had room for starts to decrease, stress increases. As margin decreases, stress, anxiety, worry increases. Has anyone ever experienced that? Maybe not. Maybe that's just me. So for example, if I'm supposed to be at church for 9 a.m. and I plan to get there at 8:40, but guess what? It's a bad day for the kids who went to bed late and they're having trouble getting up, which has happened more and more as they get older. And I'm like, come on, we got to do this. And I have this saying that an internal clock that I can look at things that are going on in the house and go, it's not going well. Even like 45 minutes, an hour before, I'm like, I can tell. And so I have this saying, I say to my wife, are we up against it? And like an hour before, I'm like, we're up against, I can tell the kids are 10 minutes behind, all this stuff. And so that's in my mind, I'm going, okay, we got to do this. And what happens is as my margin of being there at 8:40 starts to get less, and the reason why I get here early is because there's usually about 20 minutes of stuff I'm doing before starting. But as that margin starts to do it and the kids are this and something happens, guess what happens to me? As the margin decreases, Dad's increases. Let's go, we got to do this, right? So instead of coming into church, just being all whatever, right? You guys have all been there if you've had kids. You're supposed to be there for a certain time. Maybe you haven't. Maybe that's why nobody's here on time at 10:30. Maybe you don't feel this, but I feel this, right? And so you're like, come on, kids, and you're yelling at your kids, and you're like threatening your wife, you're going to leave her if she's not on time. We got to get there. And then you get into church, and you're like, bless you, brother. Amen, sister. Like everything's good, but you've just been like going to battle in the car because as the margin decreased, the stress increases. Maybe that's just me. Some of you are like, just show up whenever I show up. That way I'm never stressed. No, you just stress me out still. No, I'm just kidding. And so the kids are late and we leave and I know I can barely get there and I'm coming in, it's 8:55, 54, 55, I live pretty close, and I'm going down 20th Street driving really fast and all of a sudden you hit that weekend train. That on the weekend, it ain't no 3-4 minute train, it's a long train, right? And and then the stress increases. I'm like, I'm going to be late now, and I hate being late. So there's the process. As the margin decreases, right, as it eats it all up, stress increases. If you have $4,000 a month that comes in, whatever it might come in from your auntie, from your job, for child stuff that the government gives you, $4,000 comes in, and your budget says your bills cost you $3,999.99. Anyone living that right now, don't put up your hand. Right? And you're doing good, and everything's good, but that margin's so small that when that car breaks down, and it's a $400 bill, all of a sudden your margin, which you had was 1 cent, it's gone, and you know that. What increases the stress? How am I going to deal with this? What is happening, right? But if you're in the same situation, that's your budget, but somehow you've stewarded your finances, and you've got a lot of savings going on. If you have $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 of savings, that $400 bill isn't near as stressful. Why? Because there's margin. There's space there that doesn't cause the stress. And even I think relationally, if you go there, guess what? You probably need some space or margin in your relationship. What I mean by that is I've said that you might want to store up some good work, some good things, so that when the moments go wrong, you have margin between your load and your limit. If everything in your relationship takes you all the work just to make it work, and it's right at your limit, then guess what? The littlest thing is going to send that thing over the edge. So you need some love margin in your relationships. Obviously couples, but anybody you want to have a longer term relationship with or get close to, you need some margin. It's the space between your load and your limits. And if you don't get there, what happens is you have this, you probably heard this before, there's no margin for error. When it's full, when your load and your limit's full, when your words are going to the end of your page in your book, then guess what? When something happens that's unexpected, that's you didn't see coming, like a bill for your finance or something like that, or something in a relationship that happened, if there's no margin, there's no room for error or margin for error, then guess what? it causes collapse. It causes problems. It causes stress because there's no space to be able to handle that. And you know life. If you know life like I know life, we all know life, that's going to happen. Error is going to happen. Error. Right? Something's going to happen that you didn't schedule for, you didn't plan for, you weren't ready to deal with. And when your load and limit are equal, watch this. When your load and limit are equal, it becomes very hard to handle what you're about to face. Emotionally, that's why the Fool comes out. Mentally, if it's full, if it's equal, then something comes in and it's like, oh, collapse. Physically. And so when our load and limits are equal and someone else says, hey, can you serve at the church? Can you do this? Can we do another night? Can we do? You just kind of go, oh my goodness, this is too much. And so something gets added to your schedule and it's gonna. When we don't have margin, guess what ends up happening? Inadvertently, maybe not even on purpose, when you don't have margin and things get added to your schedule, you begin to marginalize. Watch, I'll explain. If you don't have enough margin when things get added to your schedule, if your schedule has so much, you begin to marginalize. Here's what the word marginalize means. To treat someone or something as if they're not important. To treat someone or something as if they're not important, to push something to the edges, to the margins. But guess what? If you have no room in the margins and you try to push it to the end, you're just pushing it off the page. And so what happens too with that is the things you deem important. Remember I started off by saying this. How many of you say, I wish I had more time for this? If only I had more time to do this. That was something that was probably there for your margins to be able to do. But life came in and pushed it to the outside. And whether you chose it or not, it probably was inadvertently. The things that are actually more important in your life got pushed away and became marginalized. I wish I would have spent more time with my kids. They ended up being marginalized because work just kept having overtime. I wished I would have done this with them, but so what ends up happening is if there's no margin, if something else important comes in, or you have to kind of, hey, this thing, or I got to meet this person, or someone asks, can you help me? If there's no margin, then guess what? You end up having to marginalize some things you maybe never even intended to marginalize. The less we have more margin, the more we marginalize. So if your schedule is full 24/7, you don't have a lot of room for extra stuff. You're going to end up having to marginalize some things in your life. And so work fills up things. Responsibility fills up your time. And before you know it, accidentally, inadvertently, I didn't mean for this to happen, right? You have no time left for maybe God, family, others, yourself. What do they call it, the rat race? You're involved, you're in the wheel, spinning and going over. You never planned for it, it just happened. You missed church one day, and then because something came up, and then a second day something came up, and before you know it, you're going to church once every Easter and Christmas. And you go, I don't know what happened. There was no margin, and something just filled it up. You're no longer going to church anymore. And church is something you did 3 months ago. Family night is something that happened a year ago. We were trying to do family night, and now it's a year ago, and we haven't done it. Intimacy with your spouse is something that happens on birthdays and full moons. Ow! Talking to your kids only happens during correction and when you're upset at them. Reading your Bible and praying is only during a crisis, and it's been marginalized in your life because there's no margin. Life has filled it up. So we're going to jump into this here as we do the second half here. And so we need to look at these things that are filling our schedules, and we need to say this to ourselves. You got to look and say, I need to slow my schedule. Look at your neighbor and say, slow your schedule. If you're watching today, why don't you tell me, slow your schedule, Pastor Derek. Let's see if I can see who's online with us. Slow your schedule. You need some margin. Listen, margin does not happen accidentally. Margin happens intentionally. If you just leave it, guess what? Things are going to fill up your schedule. The space in your pace is going to get jam-packed with stuff. Thanks, Aylin. She's texting me, slow my schedule. So margin doesn't happen accidentally. It happens intentionally. What fills or doesn't fill your space, what fills your page, where your load is something you have to do purposefully. Marginalization happens inadvertently or accidentally. It's a result of not having the proper margin, but margin takes intention. It could be a couple nights a week you're saying, we are not doing anything but this. I have to contend with this with 3 kids now who are getting involved in activities, and I have to contend with, okay, what's helping them, develop and grow, and what's just something we say, we're going to make sure this time is not where anyone's doing anything. We've really tried to make that Saturdays, and we've done pretty good so far. And if you notice, even as a pastor for the church, I'm aware of this and always contending with what's causing people to stretch, where God wants us to go, and allowing people margin in their life to not get burnt out. And so we've done this lately, like a few years ago, this you probably don't even know, but very rarely will our church plan anything on Saturdays. Very rarely. We'll have a conference in September. Yes, it's coming up. There's sometimes a conference here and there. But we try intentionally to not plan stuff on Saturdays because that's your family time. So that's trying to create some space and margin. And so you won't see a lot of stuff planned Saturdays because we believe that's important for you, for what you want to do. So maybe it's Saturday. So maybe it's a day and night a week that you don't do anything. Maybe it's a date night with your significant other. Maybe that needs to be something in your margin. Maybe it could be just time alone once a week where you get some time alone. And you say, we got to work this out so I can just be away, whatever that looks like. Maybe it's reading a book. Maybe that's some margin for you. Maybe it's having a nap. Maybe it's starting that hobby you always wanted. Maybe it's guys' night out. Maybe it's girls' night out. Maybe it's just taking a nap. This could all be margin. But margin should always include time to slow your schedule. What is slow again? What is the focus of everything we're doing? In the foundation of all of this, you always need to take time to sit, listen, obey, worship. But I do add to it, sit and listen. If we could get that, man, it's really been in my heart, and I've struggled to do this well. How many times do we just sit and listen like this, like you're doing now? It's probably pretty hard because our brains are always going and always active. But in all this, you need to be able to sit, listen, obey, worship, reflect. We're going to jump back into this account here, and then I'm done. Not going to take long. That I started with 2 weeks ago, the story of Mary and Martha. If you're not familiar, you can watch our service from 2 weeks ago. But basically, Martha invites Jesus over to her house. Martha's serving, Mary's sitting. And we're going to pull out a few things from this in the idea of margin, then we're going to be done. Luke 10:38-39 in the NASB says this. Now as they were traveling along, he, being Jesus, entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. And she had a sister called Mary who was seated at the Lord's feet and was listening to his word. So the first thing, and we kind of mentioned this before, but Mary had space in her pace. Mary had margin enough to sit and listen to Jesus. Guys, I can't stress this enough. As Jesus followers, if you're not yet, then you can move towards this. And maybe if you're not sure about sitting and listening to Jesus, maybe sit and listen to the people in your life that matter. That could be a starting point. But Mary had margin in her life to sit and listen to what God had to say. I need to stress this. Some of you probably do this amazing, but I need to keep pointing this out and saying, we church, need to find time to sit and listen to what God is saying. Yes. Everyone's quietly like, maybe. Right? It's not profound, but I feel it in my heart. As the lead pastor of City Center Church now, church, we need to find time to sit, be still, quiet all the noise, and listen, and then obey. If you're not a Jesus follower yet, sit, listen, and be open to what God may say to you. And then find ways for us to worship, and then repeat. So Mary found margin in her life, put it into her schedule in order to be able to do this. Luke 10:40. But Martha was distracted. Look at somebody beside you and say, stop distracting me. Oh, some of you didn't get into that like you should. Look at somebody beside you and go, stop distracting me. That is an ironic thing I got you to do, right? Because by doing that, you are now distracted. But Martha was distracted with all her preparation, and she came up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do the serving by myself? Then tell her to help me. The word distraction, you ready? This is what it means. We're going to focus on this part. It means the thing that prevents someone from giving full attention to something. The thing that prevents someone from giving full attention to something. Martha was distracted, was not able to give her full attention to something because something else was pulling her attention away. Now listen, we have this page, you got this load in your life that you got to do, and it may be different for every person. But if you have margin, if you have space around, guess what? Things that try to fill this, oftentimes we think of distractions as something wrong. Right? Like this was a distraction, you got to stay away from it. And guess what? We probably think that a lot of times distraction are the things in our life that pull us away from God, or what we would call sin. If you're a Christian, you would understand that term, missing the mark. I've wrecked a relationship in my life. Any sin has to deal with relationships. You've heard me say this before. Sin is relational, either to God or to others. That's what sin is, and that's why it's called sin, because it's destroying the relationships around you. And so we think distractions, I got distracted by this, or I got distracted by that. Well, that may be the case. I don't think it just has to be that, because I don't think most margin isn't filled up with sin. Most margin is filled up with just distraction. It might be sin, but I think most of it's distraction. Martha wasn't sinning. She was actually serving, getting ready to serve Jesus. She was actually distracted, filling up her margin with doing something for Jesus. Church, listen, this is important. We got to be careful that we don't get distracted and so busy doing stuff for Jesus, we forget to do stuff with Jesus. I'll just drop the mic there, right? We don't get busy like Martha. We're doing good things for Jesus. And this is me as a lead pastor. I have to pray and decipher this. I've said between serving and sitting and serving, that we don't get so busy doing stuff for Jesus that we forget to do stuff with Jesus. This, as a lead pastor, I found this even as executive pastor moving into this. Let me tell on myself a little bit on how that plays out in my life a little bit. So, you see me get up here and preach on a Sunday. I put time in preparing for a message. I am in the Word all the time. I love the Word, by the way. I'm teacher motivated. I love the Word of God. I love digging into it. I like getting revelation. I like saying it in a unique way and presenting it. But I got to be careful that my time in the Word isn't just for my job. Because then all I'm doing, I'm in the Word and it feels like I'm in the Word, but I'm not doing it for myself or with Jesus. I'm doing it for Him. Not to just get new revelation on what God's saying to me, to talk with Him. Also, I'm the worship leader right now, and so I pick the songs for the song service on Sundays and different things like that. So I'm into music and into worship a lot. But if I'm not careful, and what I can default to is I'm in the music and worship to pick songs for the next service instead of just getting there and saying, Jesus, I just want to worship you. I just want to get close to you and being with Jesus. I can get into praying for the church and everything that's going, and I'm praying for the job, but I forget to just come and sit and listen and go, what are you saying to me, and be with Jesus. That's where I've got to watch out. Because I can feel like, man, I'm in all things God, but I'm just doing stuff for Him instead of with Him. For Jesus can become a distraction of with Jesus. And here's why distraction. I was just thinking of this word quickly and then we'll move on. But distraction is what causes you to take away your traction in an area you should be putting your focus on. Distraction. It's telling you, it's not allowing you to get traction in the right areas of your life. And when you have certain amount of margin and space in your life, and everything is pulling away your traction from the areas you should be, family, church, prayer, all that, then guess what? It's distracting. And it's not allowing you to get traction, as we'll read in this next verse, to the good stuff, the good part. There's good parts of life you should be putting your attention and your traction towards. And so here's a question that I wanted to ask you. You want to ask yourself. I'm asking myself. How often do we fill our margin with that which doesn't give us traction in the right direction? That's a lot of words. If I was having a better day when I wrote this, I might have done it more succinctly, but I just threw it up on the page, and hopefully you can decipher what that is. There was not enough margin in that statement for you to fully understand it. I needed more space. How often do we fill our margin with that which doesn't give us traction in the right direction? If things are filling up your space and getting added to your schedule, you need to ask yourself, does this help me get traction in the direction I believe I want to go? If you're a Christian, does this help me get traction in the direction that God is calling me? Church, make sure when you're going through life and things are even simple things like, hey, do you want to do this? Hey, should you add this? Do you want these extra hours at your work? Do you want to do this about this? You consult, you come in and you go, okay, you sit and listen and go, is this adding traction in the direction that is what God is calling me? Is this going to move me to more proper margins so the things that are important in my life I can spend time, or is it marginalizing some things? All right. I added this too. How often do we fill our margin with thoughts that don't give us traction in the right direction? Come on. If we're being honest, there's a lot of stuff. I'll be honest. I've shared this in our groups. I've had to deal with more thought life in the last 4 months than I've had to do previously, probably in my entire life. I have never struggled with, sleeping, anything like that. I can leave it. And I've had to contend with that more than I ever have. And I don't even know if I can point to something changing besides potentially the shift of lead pastor, but there was a lot of that role I was already taking on. I don't know what it is, but this more than anything, I've had to go, what is filling my thoughts? And is it pointing in the right direction? Is it giving me traction in the right direction? So you want to make sure you're checking that. Luke 10:41-42. But the Lord answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, but only one thing is necessary, for Mary has chosen. Come on, look at somebody and say, has chosen. Slow my schedule, thank you. Bonnie, thank you. Geraldine, Chrissy wrote that there. Thank you for tuning in, letting me know you're here. Has chosen. Listen. You may be like me and going, I don't know where I'm going to find margin. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know how I'm going to space. This fills it up, and then this person wants to do this, and then there's this demand on me, and then there's this. At some point, you're going to have to decide if you're going to be Martha or Mary, and it said Mary chose. It's a choice where you have to go, man, there's all these reasons why maybe this is going to fill, but I need to choose ways to have margin, and it may not be what you think or what you're currently trying to do to create margin in your life. It may be something different, but Mary chose what? The good part. It's always going to be a choice, an intentional thing where we put and say, hey, we need margin in our life. And I need to put this in here, because those of you, there may be somebody here who's like, hey, it sounds like Pastor Derek's saying we don't have to do anything anymore. Right? Which is good. Like, oh, I can just roll it all out and never have to do anything. Solomon, who we talked about last week, the wisest guy to ever exist, maybe next to Jesus. Paul was pretty smart. But he said, basically, if you don't work, you don't eat. Now, we have a lot of other things going on with social programs that's not applicable. But the idea that if you're go to the ant, you lazy person, right? So I'm not saying be lazy, don't work. That's all important. We should be doing that stuff. But I'm saying if your load, right? Like if you have a book and it has this much on every page or this much on the page, how beneficial is that book? If your load is so little that like it can't help anyone or can't do anything, then you got to increase your load. So I'm not talking to those of you who are going, phew, I only have to have 2 words on every page. That's not what we're talking. We're talking about our church and kind of what's been going on. And we have a group of people that we carry the load. Man, you guys carry the load so well. So I'm talking there, as God said, it's time to go slow for a season. Sit, listen, obey, worship. And so I'm not just saying don't do anything. I'm saying you got to have a good amount of margin with your load. And so it's going to be different for anyone. I talk about optimal margin. Listen, optimal margin, the margin that's good for your life, it's going to be different on your circumstance, maybe even situations. If you're a newly married couple and you have 5 kids, then your optimal margin is probably not doing getaways, 4 times a year, romantic getaways with your spouse. That's probably not optimal margin. But if you're a retired couple and you're like, we're going to take 6 months and we're going to go to someplace warm and get away from here, that may be optimal margin for you. And if you try to do that with 5 kids, see you kids, that isn't going to work. That's not optimal margin. If you're a university, college student, and you're going through exams, your optimal margin may be 4 hours is 3 hours of sleep a week for a season. If you're a student in school who's 8, 9, 10, even a teenager, parents, listen, their optimal margin for sleep is probably 10 to 12 hours. That's not probably, it is. And we think teenagers, they're going to try to stay up. But as teenagers start moving into hormones, they actually need to go back to 12 hours of sleep. Can I get a witness from some teachers who've seen the with lack of sleep? And we think kids, I'm getting way off notes. We think kids have learning difficulties, which they may, but it may actually, they just need to sleep and get off sugar. Okay, I'm done. This was not anywhere in my, oh my goodness. I just need to help some people, right? Give them some margin so they don't have as much, this is good. This ties in. Kids, if they don't have margin in their sleep, if they're not getting enough, then guess what? It's going to look like they can't do what their brains are designed to do. They're just tired and they don't have enough nutrients. Now, there are exceptions, obviously, but I'm just saying a lot of that, even yourself, think of when you're tired, how much of a shorter fuse do you have? So think of kids who are trying to do this. So a college-age person who's going through exams, they may function 2 to 3 hours. Teenagers, young kids, they need a full sleep. That's their optimal margin, could be 10 to 12 hours. Maybe 10 is what they need. Sometimes they get 12. Please let kids get sleep. Summer, you know what? Do what you want with them because they're yours all summer. But when you're sending them to school, I am a teacher by trade, so I've experienced that. But here's what I want to land, and then I'm done. You guys have listened well again. Thank you for listening. Every time I'm aiming for 35 minutes, and it never happens. It's because you guys are such great listeners. You just pull it out of me. It's Peter's fault, right? He's like, yeah, Peter's here. I got to go longer because Peter's here today. If you don't know Peter, you should say hi to Peter. Hi, Peter. There we go. I hope you're not completely introverted and that just totally was stop talking about me. Now I'm talking about you more so. Yeah, okay, I'm done. But here's what you want to know. Oh, here's the point I put. Optimal margin. Here's another longly worded point. Write it down if you want. Take a picture if it means anything. If not, just get rid of it. Optimal margin is the amount of space in your pace that allows you to choose the good parts while still handling your responsibilities. Maybe take a picture of that one. It's going to go by fast. It's the amount of space in your pace that allows you to choose the good parts while still handling your responsibilities. The good part. I don't know if I read that. I might have missed over it because I was getting into my notes. Oh yeah, Mary chose the good part. Obviously, sit, listen, obey, worship is a good part. But the good part is your family, is the relationships in your life, is being neighborly, is loving others. That's the good part. The good part is rarely, could I say this? I'll say it. The good part is rarely making more money for the sake of making more money. Right? The good part is rarely, I want a bigger boat because I want to go faster on, again, those may be things you need to do in margin, but I'm just saying that's not generally the idea that should be making decisions is how can I just make more money or how can I do that? Those aren't the things you take with you to the other side. We talked about time being finite. But here's this, and then I read a few verses and we're done. Optimal margin will always pace yourself for proper rest. Optimal margin will always pace yourself for proper rest. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Right? To give time for proper rest from the Spirit of God. Come in Spirit when you move, you make, right? Proper rest. Now, before you go, hey, I'm antsy, I got ADHD, I can't sit still. Hey, I get it. Rest for you may not be taking a nap. For somebody, that might be the most joyful thing. You know, moms with young kids are just like, if I could just have a nap with no interruptions, with no kid coming in and like, are you sleeping, Mom? My kids, it's not like, yeah, it's not as it happened as much. But they're like, you know, they go in. I was just checking to see if she's awake. I'm like, she's not awake. She's resting. And every time you open and shut that door loud, it's not helping, right? So anyways, rest. Rest. But it may not be a nap. It may not be a book. Listen, rest is whatever recharges you. Hear that. Rest is whatever recharges or re-energizes you. For someone with high energy, rest could be skydiving. See? There it is. Right? Rest could be something very active and physical. I was listening to a minister who was talking about this, and the way they detached their mind from leading the church is they took up martial arts. And so his margin in his life is to go physically get after someone and try to take them down and hurt each other. And he loved it because his mind was engaged with something else, and it let everything else fall aside for that moment. That was rest for him. So whatever rest is that re-energizes, it could be quality time. You know, I don't know, it could be cleaning the house because that's therapeutic for some. Pat is like, that is not therapeutic for me. That is not right. So whatever rest is for you, if it gives you energy, Genesis 2:2-3. By the seventh day, God completed his work. We're talking about creation here. And God's just been spending time forming and shaping and breathing and speaking and creating and going through this process. And whether, you know, you believe that it's literal 6-day, 24 hours, or it's metaphorical of a time period, whatever way you hold on that belief, there was a time that God got to the end of the work, and it says he rested. God, with unlimited power, unlimited strength, sat there, and it says he rested, and he looked, and he said, this is good. This is good that I've done this. And he said, there was a principle he was trying to institute, and it said this: God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. And I love this, and I'm going to get into this. I was hoping to get more into the Sabbath. I talked to you that I would. That's going to have to be delayed until the talk on the series on stewardship. There's two reasons for a Sabbath: holiness and rest, and we'll get into that at some point. That's kind of the Christian idea of margin. And what's been in here, but he talks about rest, and then he says this, then God, watch, blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. He did what? He blessed it and sanctified it. There's this idea, I don't have time to get into it, just like when we tithe, it blesses and sanctifies our money. When we rest or take a Sabbath, when we have margin enough to rest, it actually blesses and sanctifies the rest of our time. And when we don't, we miss out on that blessing. And the rest of the time we have feels strained, feels stressful, feels short. And we actually have to prioritize margin, space in your pace, and rest in our life. Because in that, God says, when you do that, there's a place of blessing and setting apart so that the rest of your time actually feels fruitful and not wasted. That's good stuff. Some of you are like, I don't get it. But that's the idea that on the seventh day, God blessed the rest period and sanctified and set it apart and said, we need to not forget to do this. And we've moved into a culture where there's no more time. They don't put rest anywhere. And so the Sabbath, I'm getting into some of this, wasn't just for sanctification. It was because God understood the principle of sometimes you just need rest. He talked about it for the crops. Every 7 years, let it sit. Why? Because it needs to rest. The idea of 7 times 7 with Jubilee every 50th year, all the slaves and everything, they're going to get free. You just let everything, do all this. Why? Because people needed rest or margin or like that kind of idea. So, rest. There's lots of good parts. And so I just want to end with this. Music team, come on up. Remember I said margin is intentional. Margin is on purpose. And I understand that if you've got a life right now that's jam-packed, and you're going, I have no space, I'm stressed to the max, I'm going through stuff. I'm having trouble sleeping. I have anxiety. I'm taking stuff for panic, And man, if I've ever heard that, it is prevalent right now. We're talking to some about social anxiety, where it's almost like it's a catchy thing. Like it's a cool thing to have. I have social anxiety. I have this, and I have anxious around this. And so I know that this is prevalent. And so I can come and say, hey, you got to put some things in your life. You got to create margin. But guess what? Even if we're struggling with that right now, if you're dealing with stress and anxiety, I'm going to pray for you, because I believe God said he wanted me to pray for people that are dealing with stress and anxiety, going through things, having trouble sleeping at night. But this is what I want to say to you. Even if you're going through there and you're saying, I don't know how to get there, I have something for you right now. Matthew says this, quoting Jesus in Matthew 11:28-29. He says this, come to me, talking about Jesus saying this, come to me. That's why I'm going to pray. Some people are going to come up, not to me, but symbolically come up and say, hey, I'm coming to you, Jesus. Because in all this, I really felt towards the end, God says, I want to touch some hearts. I want to refresh some people who have been dealing with this for a long time. But Jesus says this, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I'm gentle and humble in heart. You may have had ungentle and unhumble people and things happening to you. Jesus says, I'm gentle and humble. And watch this. I love this. And you will find rest for what? Probably the most important thing. For your souls. Must have been a different translation. I gave you the wrong one. That's all right, Alana. But the translation says, you will find rest for your souls. Rest for your souls. See, we're pretty good at knowing when something's wrong in our physical. I've been going through something and I praying and so I had to rest for a little bit because you feel it physically. I think maybe even spiritually, if you're a Christian and you know, hey, it's not going well, you kind of tie in and you pray some more. But what usually is very difficult to decipher, to deal with, is mentally our soul when it needs rest. Jesus in the garden, his soul was going after some things and was saying, I don't know if I can do this. Remember, what's your soul? Your mind, your will, your emotions. I said it this way, and I love this definition, not just because I came up with it, but it's so good, is what you think about, what you decide about what you think about, and how you feel about the decisions you made that you thought about. Mind, will, emotions. What you think about, what you decided, and how you feel about all that. That goes on constantly. What am I thinking about? What are the decisions I'm making? The what ifs? How do I feel about this? And Jesus says, come to me, all who are going through it in their minds. That's who I'm focusing on today. Come to me, everyone who's dealing with stress. Come to me, whose souls are not peaceful, whose souls are anguished, whose souls can't calm down enough at night to sleep, whose souls are depressed, whose souls are thinking that they're not worth it, that they should end their own life. Jesus is saying, come to me, all who carry burdens and are heavy laden, because I can bring you rest. Somebody needs the rest of God in their soul today. Come on, stand with me. When you slow your schedule, you get rest for your soul. When you slow your schedule, when you find margin, you can find rest for your soul. When you slow, S-L-O-W, when you sit, when you listen, when you're open or obey and you worship, when you find time in your schedule to do that, you can get rest for your soul. But if it's you today and you know when I was speaking, you said, man, I've been dealing with it. I've had trouble sleeping. I'm taking medications. And again, don't stop your medications. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying right now, you can come in and Jesus says, I got some rest for you. If you're taking things to sleep and just it's been adding up, or maybe you're self-medicating to deal with stuff, that's probably because of up here. And like I said, I've had to now start going, okay, God, how am I putting my anxiety and my stress on you, and how are you bringing me rest in this season? If you say, that's me today, there's no shame in this, whether it be from anything, I believe God says, I want to give you rest today. I want you to come to the front. I'm just going to pray for you. Come on, if anybody's saying, I'm dealing with stress, I'm dealing with anxiety, there's some things I've been facing. Come on, and you say, I need some rest. I haven't been sleeping. I need some of this. Come on, I think